Chapter 6. School. Fred walked into school and went into his classroom. "What are you doing here, Willems?" Fred recognized his voice immediately. It was Jacob Clunner, one of the bullies. "Don't mess with me, Jacob," said Fred in a harsh voice as he pulled out his wand. "What do you think you're going to do with that stick, Freddy Wenny Penny?" His little bully gang laughed. They'd gone too far. "Blast 'em!" he shouted, and as he did that, the bullies flew backwards and smashed their heads and backs on the classroom door and flew in, landed on top of Mrs. Budde's desk. "Now, what do you think you boys are doing?" Mrs. Budde shouted at them. "Attention, all of you, after school." She began a lot calmer in 1 second. "Today, class, we are going to learn about World War One from this book." The bullies groaned. Everybody else, including Fred, cheered. Their favourite lesson was Mrs. Budde's history lesson. They were short and fun and brought joy to everyone except the bullies. In 1914, a colonist from a deceased country called Austria-Hungary was killed by someone horrible people from another deceased country called Yugoslavia. This started a 4-year-long war between the Allies and the Axis. We were one of the Allies, while Germany and Italy were on the Axis side. The Allies won the war. Everybody cheered except the bullies, who were not listening but instead shouted out a new swear word they found out. "Boys, 1 week of detention. Jacob, 2 weeks of detention," Mrs. Budde shouted at them. She only gave detention to the bullies, unless you count a time where one of Fred's friends got detention for punching the bullies, which got them detention too. "So what? Who cares to get someone detention?" said Jacob fancifully. "Jacob, you do not speak like a teacher like that. 1 month of detention," Mrs. Budde shouted louder than before. Jacob and his gang were open-mouthed. Their best friends getting a detention longer than 3 weeks, which is a record. So they were slightly happy. It took about a minute for Mrs. Budde to settle down. "Now, class, get the laptops and search for World War One or World War One." Fred wondered why it was called World War One, so that's what he searched for. A world war is a world war when 70% of all the countries in the world are fighting with or against each other. "Okay," Fred told himself. Jacob sat in the seat in front of him. "Hey, fishhead, come and look at this," Jacob said loudly. "Don't call each other names, Jacob. 5 weeks of detention," Mrs. Budde said sternly. But, Mrs. Budde, he called me names." He didn't. I saw you. You turned around and called him a name. Threatening 6 weeks of detention." Jacob fainted. Everybody else except his little gang were howling with laughter. Even Mrs. Budde joined in at the end. One of the bullies came up to Fred and asked him he doesn't join in with the bully, he just sticks around with them. He also asked if he could try the wand. Fred said at playtime near the teacher he can give it back to me for definite. He became a lot after this. At the end of the lesson, the boy who was talking to Fred broke up with his gang and decided to be one of Fred's buddies. Reading classes in Mrs. Usborne was the most boring. He reads books about the past, which is the only good part. He reads very slowly and drags on forever. Today he read A Wizard's Tale. This was one of his best lessons, according to Fred. After reading was finished, Jacob unfainted and said out loud, "I hate head teachers, especially this little duckhead one." He got 2 months or 2 weeks of detention. It was break time where his new friend could try out his wand. "Okay, now point at that leaf and say movie up. And then swing down as high as you can. Then you can get control of the leaf in midair. Sounds good?" Fred told him. "Yes," he said. "First, what's your name?" Fred asked him. "Toby Hutchcock," said Toby. "I already know. Fred Willems," Toby told Fred. Fred gave the wand as he did what he said. "Wow," Toby said in a surprised voice. Fred remembered what it was like when he did his first magic. It was like entering a whole new world, which was more than likely actually was with Pete. No one else knew. It was amazing. Toby asked a question that Pete asked him once. "Where did you find that?" Fred decided for a joke that he told Pete when he asked that. "On the floor a few minutes back." "Just kidding. On the floor in the forest near a hut." "Okay," Toby said, a little confused. Fred didn't know where or how wands were made, but he was going to ask Pete after school. After break time was choice reading, held by Mrs. Salisbury, where you get your own book and read it for as long as you want. Until the next lesson, Fred's friend, Percy, brought about 5 books every day, a record in his class. Jacob started being mean to him again, so he read out about the spell Shutmouth, which makes them unable to speak for 1 hour. It said you have to You have to close your mouth, put your wand then, and then say shut mouth, and tug it at them. Fred put his wand to his mouth, turned around, and said shut mouth, and tugged his wand. Jacob fell silent immediately. Finally, Clarence gone silent. The class howled with laughter, while Jacob was shouting at everybody silently. He looked over Fred's shoulder and saw that this would only last for 1 hour. He was mad, very mad. After this, Fred read about burn down, a fire spell used on attacks. Fred wasn't going to use this anytime soon. It's complicated, Fred said quietly. He couldn't practice now. He would only do it on open field. Counter spells. Recurrent, water down, splashy, he told himself quietly. He was reading the counter spells just so it didn't set a field on fire. After choice reading, it was maths, with Mrs. Golson. He made maths more fun and made it some people's second favourite, behind history. Today, class, we're going to learn how to do our 1,556,384 times 300,442,754. Mrs. Golson said in a very quick Italian accent. That's really hard, Grind whispered to Fred. Grind was one of Fred's besties and been together ever since they were 6. Fred had his 7th birthday a few days after they met. The way you can work this out is by doing this. Mr. Golson moved out of the way. A very confusing bar graph was shown on the board. Hey, smart kid, run the lesson. I've got work to do. He was pointing at Harry while he left the room. Now, today, we are going to be doing this lesson about maths. Harry said, trying his best to sound like Mrs. Golson. Some kids chuckled. Harry, do the lesson properly, one of the girls said at the back. Most of the kids nodded their heads, including Fred. Okay then, Harry said to the whole class. Look right here. We've got this bar which represents 1 million, and this other one which represents 56,000, and this other one that is 300, and this one that is 800, and this one that is 4. Some of the girls at the back clapped. Now these blue ones represent 300,000, 40,000, 2,000, 7,000, 50, and 4. Harry said in a slow type of voice which he was unexpected. Harry was normally a very fast talker, but now he was talking slower than Mr. Usborne in reading. First, he must times 1 million by 300,000. Then he times all the rest of the number by 300,000. The rest of the lesson went about this way. Finally, you must times 4 times 4. That gives an answer of 362,79,841,536. Harry said as he finished the lesson. Hey, look at that enormous spider over there, Harry pointed out. Indeed, there was a giant spider roaming around the place. 70% of the class screamed and ran. The other 25% ran with no screaming. Only Toby and Fred were left. Fred ran to the window and opened it and ran out. Fred, no, you could get hurt. You could die, Toby shouted at him. He ignored him and ran to it. Blast him, Fred shouted. The spider flew backwards and lay there, twitching. Toby was impressed. Fred climbed back into the classroom just as Mr. Golson stormed in. Why is everybody running and screaming? He shouted louder than Mrs. Willis, which was a very rare thing for him to shout. He was one of the most chilled people in the school. There was a spider, as big as his classroom, was outside. Harry told everybody, Toby stuttered. Mr. Golson stormed out of the classroom to give Harry attention. I think this is Harry's first attention, Toby said while laughing. Yep, Fred said, agreeing with Toby. After maths was English with Mr. Denter or Mrs. Kukul. Mr. Denter's English lessons were creative writing, while Mrs. Kukul's was very boring. They had to do the exact same thing or else they would get bad scores. Today was Mr. Denter. Okay, class. Today we're going to write at least 1.5 pages of whatever you want. Tomorrow is me, then on Wednesday is Mrs. Cuckle. Now, who wants a planner? Fred was one of the only people to put their hands up for a planner. Okay, Toby, Fred, Toby, Brian, Gina and Fredina, you're on planning sheets, Mr. Denter told everybody. Me as well, said Andrew, another one of his friends. Mr. Denter went out of the room to get some planner sheets. Fred, I used to be friends with Jacob. What? Toby whispered to Fred. Fred said yes. Well, he let me know one of his deep secrets, which he regretted straight away. Shall I tell you? Yes. He told me that he had a love interest with Gina and Ferdinand. He also told me he used to live in America, and he flunked 2 of his grades. That's why he's taller than all teachers. Wait, so he's 16? Fred asked precariously. 18. In America, grade 3 is grade 2. So that's 1 way. Plus he flunked 2 grades, and he had his birthday last week. I thought grade 3 is grade 4. Grade 4. So he's 17. This is confusing. Let's just say he's 17. Yeah. At the moment, Mr. Denter came in and gave everybody who asked a planning sheet. Who needs a planning sheet, Freddie Wenny, you filthy little fraud? Fred turned around and saw Jacob and his gang chuckling and sniggering at Fred. Just ignore them, Fred said while turning Fred's face around to look away from them. Toby, shall I do a spell on them? Fred whispered to Toby. Do it when you must, Toby whispered back. Some of Fred's friends were a bit jealous of Toby, until Fred reminded them about what he did to them when he'd met them. He'd give them a new friend more time than the others, just to make them feel better and to like him and want to stay with him. Fred named the story Fred and the Terrifying Fire Dragon. He planned out the story in a way he'd never before. He had ideas. He had real-life experiences. He had a feeling which never before he started playing. Enjoy yourself while you can, butthead. Jacob sneered at him. Fred was angry, so hungry that he did something he never meant to do. He stood up, came over to Jacob, and shot a spell at him. Knocks him, Fred shouted as he tugged his wand at Jacob. Jacob fell on the floor, lying there, helpless. Mr. Denter rushed over and felt Jacob's heart. It was still beating. He's knocked out, Jacob's knocked out, he said over and over and over again. Call up his parents, Mr. Denter said to himself. He went to the telephone and called them up. How would you do that? All his classmates were saying to himself. Other than Jacob's gang and kind of Toby, everyone was excited. Told you, do it when you need to, Toby said over the crowd. Toby smiled at Fred. He smiled back. Mr. Denter came back into the classroom. Does anybody know how that happened? Mr. Denter asked everybody. Gina stood up. Jacob was calling Fred rude names, so Fred used his silk stick and knocked him out. Really, Fred? Before anybody else could say something, Toby stood up and said, Fred's a wizard. The whole class and some people from nearby stared at Fred. He used the spell Knocks him to knock him out. Everybody stared at him harder. I can prove it to you, Fred stuttered as bad as anyone could get. He pointed his wand at one of the bullies and showed everybody what he did. Knocks him, he said while tugging his wand at the bully. Then he fell to the floor with a thud. Mr. Denter checked his heart. He's going at the same pace Jacob's was. He'll be knocked out for several hours. How long, you three questions? 4 hours, Fred said, sadly. Can you knock me out then? Said Hervogina. No, do you really? Anyway, only these 6 deserve it. He was pointing at the rest of the bully gang. Blast, Fred said, tugged his wand at them. They got knocked out. Mr. Denter checks their heartbeats. A bit slower, but mostly the same, he said. Now, everybody, calm with your work and silence, he said calmly. Fred was one of the last to finish. He did a good job because he got a 9 out of 10. Toby got a 3 out of 10, and all his friends got a 4 to 7. Next was spelling with Mrs. Buddis. Again, very few people disliked this lesson. Next word is favourite. Fred spelt this one wrong. He put favourite. Favourite was the only spelling Fred got wrong. He next had science with Mr. Gurging, a.k.a. Mr. Crazy. He thought everything was right about his job. He even sang about it when he thinks no one is looking. He sometimes gets the whole class to note him singing on accident. Today, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be doing a volcano. He sang in lots of different types of voices. He pointed at the class. Experiment, they shouted. Good. Now we're going to get this paper mache volcano, and then then we're going to put this in the baking soda and vinegar, and then mix them up, and boom! Look, it's exploding. The volcano was spurting out green liquid out of it. Mr. Gurgen poured some red and orange food colouring. The green now looked more like lava coming out. Mr. Gurgen poured some more vinegar and baking powder it. It went all over the first and second rows. Mr. Gurgen added more and more bottles of baking soda and vinegar. And now and everywhere, from the students to the floor, seeing and even to him. Recurrent, Fred managed to say over all the lava-like stuff. He was controlling the liquid. He put it back in the container. How did that happen? Mr. Gurgan said, out shaking his body. Gross, said all the girls said at the back in disgust. Let me help you. Move you up, he said. He was trying to get all the glop out of the 14/15-year-old school shirts. After he finished doing that, he threw it at Mr. Gurgan. Some people laughed at him, while others were laughing at how messy the fashion girls were. I can make you go silent, you know, Fred told the boys, laughing at the girls. Remember, I'm a wizard. All the pupils left the classroom before I had ended. Now go back. It was Mr. Usborne. He said that they would be getting detention for a week if they didn't go back to class, so they all went back into seats, miserably. The rest of the lesson was watching Mr. Gurgan get the glop over his face. After science was another break. This one was more of a lesson to Fred about spells than break from learning. This wand, this sounds interesting, Fred said suspiciously. He wondered what this spell was about. Seems it can make a wand fly out of their hand or break their wand. This sounds quite good, I guess. He thought about using it on another wizard. It could be a useful spell for knocking Jacob's hand off him when he tries to hurt him. To do this wand, you have to point at the wand, put your wand behind your head and say this wand. Then it will go flying, potentially breaking the wand. Okay, let's try it. He pointed it at Gina because she was drawing, and he said this one. Gina's pencil flew out of her hand. Where's my pencil? Gina shouted. Fred found the pencil and made it go back in her hand. Ah! She screamed. She stopped shouting and said to her friend, Hannah, that was probably Fred playing the trick of them. Which was kind of true, but also was not. This worked, Fred whispered to himself. This could be useful sometimes. He wanted it to be home time so he could talk to Pete about magic. Nobody knew much or any magic. After his final break, it was his final lesson. Drama with Mrs. Witterback. She was basically the girl version of Mr. Gurgan. Today, we are going to act out World War II, she said to everybody. She gave everybody Nerf guns painted in grey and some grey full suits and grey helmet. Now, Fred, you go there. Gina, you go there. Girls, you go by Gina. Boys, you go behind Fred, she ordered the children. Now, boys, go behind those sandbags, and girls go behind those sandbags, and shoot! Everybody's shooting each other. Now, when you get shot, fall on the floor. About 5 people fell on their backs. Good, Mrs. Witterback said in a way that was not very normal. Even though there probably wasn't one, Fred wanted to use a spell with his wand instead of using a Nerf gun. Fred was nearly hit by a Nerf bullet. That was a close one, Fred said. He never knew that this was one of the hundreds he missed. Loads of bullets were going to him. He missed all of them. He may have a jinx on the bullets that come his way. He forced himself to get hit, but he didn't get hit by one. He knew it was jinxed. Fred did a spell that nobody heard, and the sandbags were floating in midair. Everybody except Fred was really out. Everybody wait in a corner and stay put while I try to put these through. Ah! The sandbags fell on top of her. Fred went over to pick them up. So did most of the class. After about 2 minutes of hearing Mrs. Witterback telling everybody to do it quicker, she got up. Class ended, she said slowly. Everybody ran out the window and went back home.